Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are heading towards the late stages of this 2031 to 2032 offseason. Our A's have been very active in the trade market this offseason, but unfortunately we have not been able to do much in the free agent market. And at this point, our approach is going to be to see who is willing to sign a minor league deal or a very discounted deal in a few weeks when spring training finally gets underway. And that start of spring training is less than 3 weeks away at this point. Opening day, less than 2 months away. And we'll find out right when spring training is getting underway how we did in the development lab this year. We checked in on our progress at the end of the last episode, only 2 to 3 weeks away from results at this point, hoping for perhaps 4 successful programs this year. And right now we're also on target for 1 very unsuccessful program. So in a perfect world, we'll get 4 successes and no real negative results. But we'll find out more about that shortly. And we've made it to the start of spring training. Still some interesting players on the market. The most interesting among the pitchers is probably Aaron Civale, closing in on 37 years old, and he's now fragile physically. But he is a guy who, over the last 3 years in the majors, has averaged a 10-8 record over the last 3 years, coming off of a rough 5.41 ERA. The velocity in the low to mid-90s, certainly not exceptional at this point, but has a profile that indicates he could be a useful major league pitcher for us in a pinch. So we will bring the one-time all-star into camp if he ends up signing that minor league deal with us, and a few other familiar names that we're going to be bringing in as well among pitchers, or more accurately, trying to bring in. And there's also still a handful of higher-end position players on the market. We made minor league offers for a reunion with Darell Hernandez, as well as the catcher Alejandro Kirk, who could give us some organizational depth in AAA. C.J. Abrams is a guy we've been keeping an eye on all off-season. He could serve as a useful infielder for us. I know some of you, going back to the start of this offseason, were concerned with the fact that we brought back the fragile yet potentially borderline spectacular defensive shortstop Brian Rincon for a likely final season in Oakland. He is fragile, as I mentioned, and Abrams could potentially give us a little bit of depth, who can play a number of positions, not just in the infield if we did have some issues. He's looking for a minor league contract that becomes a guaranteed major league deal if promoted. That's something I think I'm willing to do. I don't know if I want to be paying him $2.8 million. Not sure exactly how low we're going to be able to go right now. I don't think 1.6 is going to be enough. Yeah, he's only coming down to 2.68 million. I think the most we'll offer him right now is 2 million if he ends up on the major league contract. And he's not willing to think about that yet, so we'll continue to wait on Mr. Abrams. And the other guy that we've been following who's still on the market is the veteran at this point first baseman Austin Riley. He is looking for a guaranteed major league contract. He's down to a 1-year deal. I believe the last time we checked in on him towards the end of the previous episode, he was looking for 4 years at $7.5 million a year. So he's gotten more realistic, but he still is looking for a guaranteed spot in the starting lineup, or at least us to lie to him and tell him that that's what we'd be giving him. We talked about this in previous episodes. He's had a pretty steep decline over the past 3 seasons, given that he's going to be 35 right about opening day. I don't think we can justify paying him $6 million a year based on what he was a few years ago. He did still hit 34 homers last year, to be fair, but he still was a below average offensive player when all was said and done. He doesn't bring a lot to the table defensively this point, and we'd be kind of envisioning is a useful bat against left-handed pitching, but would prefer not to be playing him against right-handed pitching. And for a platoon player on the less important side of the platoon, who doesn't bring a ton to the table defensively and is 35 years old and declining, $6 million and a guaranteed starting spot seems a bit rich to me. If we do look at his splits, last year he was a bit below average against righties, and he's been below average against righties each of the last 2 years. Still much more productive against left-handed pitching, but even last year in 150 at-bats against lefties, he was a slightly below average offensive player. So I wouldn't mind having him on our team, but a guaranteed $6 million contract for the role that we envision for him is still too rich for my blood. And with just 1 day left until development lab results, things have gotten worse from where they were when we last checked in. We've only got 3 potentially successful programs. Jake Ortega still on track with his plate discipline. John Thomas Estrada is excelling in a quality of contact program. And Bobby Cabral, the new addition, who we think could be a useful power hitter for us, is 1 to 2 weeks away from the end of his program since we traded for him in the early stages of the offseason. But he's on track. Unfortunately, catcher Ken Weaver is now struggling with his ability to generate bat speed, which could result in a negative program. And everybody else is frustrated at this point, including Jason DeCaro, who had that allegedly somewhat easy secondary pitch improvement program that he looks like he may end up not being successful on. So with a day left, 3 successful programs and 1 very unsuccessful program is looking like a potential outcome for us, although unfortunately we won't find out about one of the hopefully successful programs for another couple of weeks. And we've simmed ahead a day. Fortunately had a nice start to spring training with a 9-1 victory over the Yankees. Of the 7 programs that have concluded, as expected, 4 with no improvement. We got a poor result from catcher Ken Weaver. He came up last year and did a pretty nice job for us. Unfortunately, his avoid strikeout rating dropped by less than 5 points. So he could be striking out a bit more. He's a guy who we kind of rushed to the majors last year when we were forever struggling with that backup catcher spot. And in the last month of the season, he was, as I noted, more than respectable for us with a 118 WRC plus. But he only had 9 games above high A ball before we brought him on board. And we did make I don't want to say a big trade, but we did make a trade this offseason for the right-handed hitting catcher, Mr. Kaufer, who is probably going to be our backup. More accurately, he's going to be our platoon guy playing against left-handed pitching, while Drake Baldwin, who likely is in his final year in Oakland, will be in the platoon against right-handed pitching. So Weaver will probably get an opportunity to get some more significant playing time in Double and Triple A this year. But given that we saw a fair amount of untapped potential in terms of his power, we put him on that Generate Bat Speed program, and unfortunately didn't do much there, and he's going to be a little bit more of a free swinger striking out. Did get a successful plate discipline program from Jake Ortega, our hopeful center fielder of the future after we signed him to a major league guaranteed 9-year contract right at the start of this past offseason after he hit just a $155 and 58 at-bats. So we did get a 5-point improvement in his eye, should be able to draw some more walks going forward. We still think he's got some decent untapped potential in contact and gap power, but at 24 years old, it's time to kind of fulfill that untapped potential relatively soon for the former third overall pick in the draft. And then the most successful program was with Arturo Estrada, international amateur free agent from several years ago. Put him on that quality of contact program, and with the outstanding result, his current BABIP rating improved by 5, and his potential BABIP rating improves by somewhere around 5. So some decent progress for Arturo Estrada, the 20-year-old. Has been in A-ball for the last 2 years. Probably going to need to move him up to high A this year at the very least to start the season. Taking a look at the Midwest League. Looks like he's borderline to be there, but is a soon-to-be 21-year-old, number 29 prospect in baseball, who, as I said, has spent the last 2 years in single A. I think we probably got to push him a bit and move him up to high A ball for when the minor league season begins. So with the long programs that we began last November largely completed, you can see we've got some base running fundamentals and defense and bunting oriented shorter programs set up for some of the younger prospects and hopefully big pieces of the future of this organization. And again, we'll hear whether Berner Cabral is successful in that Generate Bat Speed program that he looks like he's on track for right now in another couple of weeks. And while we've signed a few of the guys that we previously talked about to minor league deals, we won't be getting Mr. Riley this year. He signed with Cleveland for $3.4 million. So that probably ends the chances of us guaranteeing anyone a major league contract. We'll continue to try to expand the overall level of talent, particularly in the higher level of minors, by probably signing a few more guys to minor league deals over the next few weeks. But Riley will not be on our team, at least not at the start of the season. I also have had one pretty significant injury in spring training. Vince Shaver, 15th round pick in 2028, who looks like he could be a useful-ish major league pitcher. Split last year between high A and double A with sub-4 ERAs at both levels, was in the major league camp with us this year, fighting for a potential role in the bullpen. But with a torn UCL, he will be now 26 years old before he throws a baseball again. And with his fragile injury proneness and the fact that he's going to be over 26 and probably miss the start of spring training next year, whether or not he ever gets a chance in the majors is certainly up for debate at this point. But has made pretty good progress for a 15th rounder, but missing this entire year, which was going to be a pivotal year for him, where he had a shot, not a great shot, but a shot in making the major league roster and was likely to get some experience in AAA. Missing out on all of that certainly not going to help his longer term prospects. And some really good news from the development lab after we didn't end up signing much of anything. Bobby Cabral, who was the acquisition this offseason in trade, pretty significant acquisition for us, had an outstanding Generate Bat Speed program. His potential power increased by 5, but his current power rating increased by a ridiculous 15 points. And you can see now we think he's a 70 out of 80 potential power guy. Certainly think that his bat could be very useful in our lineup going forward. Isn't the right-handed hitter that we really needed to bring on this offseason, but that home run bat could be important for us, especially given the fact that ownership wants us to improve our home runs this year. And given that we were last in the AL a year ago, there's really no place for us to go but up. And as we head into literally the final day of spring training, a even more significant injury than the one Shaver suffered to a young pitching prospect on our team. Levi Sterling going to miss 5 months with a torn back muscle that he suffered a couple days ago. Sterling, the former third-round pick in our first draft in 2024, made his major league debut last year late in the season and put up a 3.07 ERA with 20 strikeouts over 14 and 2/3 innings. With the outstanding stuff that he has, excellent curve, slider, and fastball, and a decent changeup. He was certainly going to be getting work in our bullpen and could have potentially earned a spot in the rotation if others struggled. Unfortunately, at this point, he's going to miss what was set to be his first full season in the major leagues, and we won't likely be seeing him until September. So it'll give somebody else on the pitching staff an opportunity to step up. And with spring training now over, we'll check in on the development lab, and looks like we're on track to have 5 guys improve, only 2 who are frustrated at this point. Unfortunately, it's a very important player in Stubblefield who's working on his base running fundamentals, as well as Ken Weaver, who had that very unsuccessful program to try to improve his power earlier this offseason and is now, similar to Stubblefield, also struggling with base running fundamentals. But everyone else is on track in these somewhat less comprehensive and simpler programs. And we've made it to the end of spring training. The most significant injury we suffered was certainly the reliever Levi Sterling. That opened up opportunity for us to make some interesting decisions with the 13 players we are going to bring north. The final cut, which actually didn't end up being a cut because we traded him away among our pitchers, was Lyon Richardson. We had picked him up before last season. He was 4-0 for us with a 3.68 ERA, so he is a respectable but not great right-handed reliever. He does have a guaranteed major league contract, so we wanted to save a little bit more money to open up the opportunity to hopefully make some trades or pick up some players on waivers who will help us even more. So he ended up being the final guy that didn't make our pitching staff, and we were able to trade him away for the veteran Jesus Sanchez, who's on a minor league contract, signed with the Cleveland organization. Certainly not a big-time player anymore at this point at the age of 34. Hit just .216 with a 66 WRC plus and was more than a win below replacement for Kansas City in the majors last year, but will give us some organizational depth. He'll likely end up on our AAA team, although he's been automatically assigned to AA for the time being. Still have not figured out all of our minor league rosters quite yet. But to get a guy who we thought could be useful and get a guaranteed contract off our books, open up another spot on the 40-man roster, felt like that trade made sense for us. And the 3 final cuts from our everyday players, one of whom was a pretty prominent player who we picked up as a minor league free agent signing less than a month ago, and that's Jared Kelnick. Certainly think he is a left-handed bat who's competent defensively, a really good personality, and still a pretty useful hitter against right-handed pitching. Love the fact that we're going to be able to stash him in AAA as organizational depth. He was with us a couple of years ago, and he was fine in AAA, not incredibly productive as a late season call-up. Last year he hit just a buck 84 in Washington with a 50 WRC plus over 152 at bats. So at this point in his career, he very well might be a 4A guy. The rating suggests that he's probably a little better than that against right-handed pitching, but hasn't proven it over the last few tries he's had in the majors. So like the fact that he's some good organizational depth for us, but not quite good enough to make our 26-man roster. Second final cut among position players was Sergio Estrada, the switch-hitting shortstop we picked up as a minor league free agent signing right before the turn of the year. And I think he is a more than competent major league player at this point. We've talked about how he could be our shortstop of the future, or certainly a middle infielder of the future if we move on from Brian Rincon and others this offseason. We also have to promote him within 30 days to that $1.5 million contract, or we can lose him. So it's very conceivable that by the end of April, we'll be promoting him to the major league team. But right now, although he's fully trained up at shortstop, he's got a little work to do at second and a fair amount of work to do at third to get completely proficient and developed defensively. And since we don't feel like we absolutely need him in the infield right now, we're going to let him play at least the first few weeks of the season in Las Vegas before we have to make a decision that will hopefully enable us to keep him on our team for the long term. And given that we sent the infielder Sergio Estrada down, the final cut from our 26-man roster may be surprising those of you who have followed us over the years, but Hideki Arakawa, who's been our second baseman more often than not over the past few seasons, ends up being cut as well. He was a veteran that we signed out of Japan a few years ago, still has option years left, making $1.5 million. He's our best defensive second baseman with that 65 range and error rating. But unfortunately, over the course of his major league career, he's put up just a 73 WRC plus offensively. And with the fact that we've been pretty good defensively, but we've struggled offensively, he ended up being an odd man out as far as making the team right now. Certainly still could be part of our future going forward, given his good defense and the fact that we could be moving on from our starting shortstop this year, as I talked about earlier. But Arakawa is also going to be able to get a little seasoning in AAA at the start of this season. So with those cuts and trades that we mentioned, what does the 26-man roster actually look like? The starting rotation, very similar. Jackson Ferris back as our ace in what will likely be his final year with us, although he does still have arbitration eligible year for almost $18 million next year, given that he's spent some time on the IL the last few seasons. Chase Burns back as our number 2 starter. Jason DeCaro will be our 3rd starter. Mason Miller, number 4. And then Caden Dana, who we picked up a year ago, gets the opportunity to be our number 5 starter this year after we move on from Shane Boz, who was in our rotation last year but was a free agent we couldn't afford to bring back. New addition, lefty Andrew Nardi will be our closer. 3 setup guys, our former closer Chase Lee, lefty Alex Vesia, and we hope, most interestingly, the right-hander Jeremy Scholl. He was an 8th-round pick in 2027, was brilliant last year across 3 levels, high A, double A, and triple A. Didn't get called up at the end of the year. I believe he had an injury issue. Actually, no, he didn't. I guess we just had recently promoted him to AAA, and we kept him there, and he was really good with a 1.06 ERA over 17 innings. So interested in seeing what the 23-year-old can do at the major league level. Cole Henry, who was a minor league free agent signing of ours a couple years ago, is going to make the team as a middle reliever. Mason Black, who missed most of last season with an injury, back as a middle reliever as well. You may remember he was a stopper for us a few years ago before he had some injury issues. We'll see how he does before potentially thinking about him in that type of role. Left-handed pitcher out of the bullpen, a guy we picked up in a trade this past offseason, Henry Lelaine. Certainly think he's a guy who could fill in the rotation if we needed going forward. And then Rule 5 acquisition, Jose Acuna, who we picked up from the Mets last Christmas Eve, will get the opportunity to be a long reliever for us as well here in 2032. Turning now to the 13 position players we'll be bringing north with us, and with the 3 final cuts that we talked about, there's going to be some surprises here. Certainly at least one name that we've never talked about before ended up making the team. The catching platoon is going to be what we expected. Drake Baldwin, a guy who likely in his final year with us in this Win Now season, and the new addition, Max Kaufer. Tyler Soderstrom back as a first baseman for us against right-handed pitching. Kevin Stubblefield, the youngster who was so good in the playoffs for us last year despite not having played in the majors before the postseason began, will be a DH/first baseman for us, playing every day, hopefully giving us the boost as far as a right-handed hitter that we've often needed. Jefferson Rojas, similarly, is going to be a second baseman for us against righties, a third baseman for us against lefties, another right-handed bat that we hope will boost our offense. Colt Keith, in what could be his final year with us, back as our third baseman and cleanup hitter, and he'll actually play DH against left-handed pitching. Justin LeBron is back as a utility infielder. He'll be starting at second against lefties. And Brian Rincon will be back as our everyday shortstop in what will likely be his final go-round in Oakland. Chase DeLauder, the left-handed hitter, back as our left fielder against right-handed pitching. The guy that we've never talked about before who made the team, recent addition, Judd Fabian, the right-handed hitting center fielder. Signed him as a minor league free agent a little less than 2 months ago. He has not been particularly productive the last 3 seasons. His most productive season was last year in Tampa Bay, where he had a 94 WRC plus. He's hit 23 home runs each of the last 2 years, but he has still been a below replacement level player, given that he struggles to make contact and he strikes out an absolutely obscene number of times. With 265 and 225 the last couple years, he's not quite Hidero Endo level, but not much better than that. But think that Fabian, as a center fielder for us against left-handed pitching, can give our starting center fielder, Luis Lara, who's fragile physically, some time off, and hopefully be a more productive bat, playing only against left-handed pitching than Lara typically would be. New addition Bobby Cabral, who had that excellent and very productive time in the development lab this year, really pushing his home run power higher, is going to be in the lineup for us as an everyday right fielder. And then the final guy who made the team, Jake Ortega, who we had talked a lot about through the past off season and even last season, is whether or not he'd be making this team coming out of spring training. But he's spent the last year and a half in AAA Las Vegas. He's the number 20 prospect in baseball, former 3rd overall pick. He did not do well in a limited sample size in Oakland last September, but we like his speed, we like his glove, and the bat's got a little bit of work to do to develop. But looking at our coaching in AAA and our coaching in the majors, and his relationships were slightly better in the majors and the coaching as far as his development and his mechanics and even what our hitting coach could deliver was overall a little better in the majors as well. So we are going to keep Ortega up. He's going to be our starting left fielder against left-handed pitching, and we are actually, when we work on our depth charts, going to end up putting Ortega in as a regular backup in center field, left field, right field, even at DH, at a pretty regular basis, to hopefully ensure that even though he's only regularly in the starting lineup against left-handed pitching, we can still hopefully get him to start 120 or so games this year and maybe play in 140 plus if he's healthy. Basically piecemeal away to a pretty full season and pretty regular at-bats for him in the majors to hopefully boost his development, because at the age of 24 and a half, kind of time to see what he can do in the majors, particularly now that he is operating under that 9-year, $47.5 million contract we signed him to last offseason. He's inexpensive this year, making just $1 million, but we're going to need to do everything we can to supercharge his development and hopefully ensuring he gets a lot of playing time in the majors with some better coaching will help his development, and hopefully the switch hitter will ultimately help jumpstart this offense, since we didn't end up making a big free agent acquisition this past offseason. And we've simmed ahead a couple of days to opening day. We did get one poor result, unfortunately, with Kevin Stubblefield, the guy that we just signed to a 10-year contract. Poor on his base running, didn't learn anything. Complains of some leg tightness and may now be more prone to injury. So that's certainly not what we were looking for. But we did have a number of successful programs as well. Jaheim Penniman, the young pitcher, improved his defense. Bertrand Albrighton, successful with base running. Jake Ortega improves his bunting. Josh Teeples improved his defense as pitcher. And Alejandro Landin with a potentially improved program as a base runner as well. Teeples in particular, a lot of improvement in his defense. He's a guy who's going to begin the season at Las Vegas, one of the guys that we traded for this past off season. Just missed making the major league roster, but figure we'd rather get him a little more consistent pitching time as a starter in AAA Las Vegas. Ortega improved his bunting abilities, not that they were huge. We also just got a scouting report back on Ortega. We still see pretty high potential, which hopefully will do something to realize. And it looks like his eye is now slightly above average now, at least according to this latest scouting report, after that successful program he had this offseason. Bertrand Albrighton, as we talked about, a little bit of base running improvement, and Jaheim Penniman improved his pitching skills. He's coming off of that significant injury last year, cost him most of the offseason, so he couldn't get in a longer program. The former number 2 overall pick in 2028. Going to have to keep working on his control. We like the fact that he potentially has a pretty versatile arsenal, although the curve is the only pitch that could be excellent. But control is still an issue for him, and unfortunately his stuff and movement don't look like they're going to be quite as high end as we hoped when we picked him up. He was pretty effective in his 2 starts in AA last year, and hopefully he will get this year off to a good season, or a good start as well. And before we begin the season, I'm going to check in on 2 final things. One, our owner goals for the year, and then we'll also check in on our projections. As we've talked about, it's going to be a must-win season here for the A's because we have a lot of players in the likely final year of their contract. Ownership wants us to have a winning record this year, They want us to improve our home runs. They want us to improve our draft record. They want us to improve our record in extra inning games, and that is the most highly important goal, oddly. And then our long-term goal was to win a second championship this team by this year, 2032, after that unexpected title we earned in 2029. So some pretty significant goals. The most critical to me is the winning record and hopefully guiding this team back to the playoffs for a third time in 4 years. Because as we have talked about, this roster could look very different in 2033 than it does today, and it may not be quite as good, unfortunately. And the final thing we're going to check in on is the preseason predictions, and we're not expected to have a real big-time season here in Oakland. We're expected to have a losing record. 80-82 would be 17 games behind the Astros in the AL West. Clearly will not make a playoff spot if we end up with a 80-82 record. We are projected to hit 192 home runs, which, while far from the league lead, would be better than Chicago, Detroit, and Tampa Bay, and tied with Kansas City. So there would be some modest improvement from a year ago. Projected to have a 4.11 ERA this year, which looks like it's on the better end of the American League teams, but not one of the real premier pitching staffs. Projection-wise, some guys expected to have monster seasons. Unfortunately, none of them are Oakland A's. Pitching-wise, our good buddy Jason DeCaro, who was 15-9 a year ago, expected to go 15-4 with a 3.08 ERA this year, at least in the simulation that was just run. The young pitcher Steve Tudor expected to have a monster season for Kansas City once again. And Wyatt Langford, if he really does come through with the 51 homers and 117 ribbies, he could have an opportunity to win the 5th most valuable player award of his very impressive career. Over in the National League, the Mets expected to be the best team in the league, and you can see there are some monster seasons expected over in the NL as well. 20-game winner in Grayson Rodriguez potentially, and that brilliant knuckleballer of Miami, Andres Rojas, expected to go 19-7 with an excellent 2.63 earned run average. And hopefully when all is said and done here in 2032, we will be better than anticipated. With the season getting underway between now and the next episode, we are going to pursue the waiver wire, see if maybe we can help the back end of our bullpen, or who knows, maybe even a position player with whoever's been let go of by their major league teams. And we're also going to make our final adjustments as the season gets underway to scouting, player development, and the draft budget. My hunch is we'll probably put a little bit of extra money in the draft budget, maybe a little bit less than we have today in scouting and player development, but we should have the opportunity to take on some contracts as we get closer to the trade deadline with some money available this year. I guess that's the only benefit from not being active players in free agency when we had a little money to spend, is that we can hopefully be significant players as we get closer to the trade deadline and look for some rentals. And hopefully when all is said and done, this roster that we've put together here, as well as some rentals, will be enough to get this team to a winning record and hopefully back in the playoffs. And we'll find out how we end up doing in the early stages of this 2032 season in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.